Hi and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. It all started with a dream, but it wasn't even my dream. It was hers, and I suppose for a time I was so in love that her dreams and mine were indistinguishable, a single shimmering future we were meant to build together. She wanted to be an architect, not just any architect, but one of those visionary types who get written about in glossy magazines, the kind who build structures that defy gravity and convention. I saw the spark in her eyes when she talked about it, a fire that could reshape the world, and I wanted to be the one to hand her the fuel. The problem was that the only path to that dream led through the hallowed halls of a university, so prestigious its tuition fees sounded like the budget of a small country. We were young, barely making rent in a cramped city apartment, and the figure on the acceptance letter might as well have been a demand for a unicorn. I saw the light in her dim when she looked at that number. She was ready to give up, to settle for a lesser school, a lesser dream, and I couldn't stand it. I remember the exact moment I made the decision. We were sitting on the floor of our living room, eating cheap takeout, the letter lying between us like a tombstone. I looked at her, at the raw talent and passion she possessed, and I looked at my own life, a steady but unexciting job in logistics, a path that was safe but led nowhere spectacular. And I thought, what if one of us could make it? What if I could put my own small ambitions on hold to launch her into the stratosphere? It felt like the noblest, most loving thing a man could do. So I told her. I told her we would do it. I would handle the money, all of it. She just had to focus on becoming the brilliant architect I knew she was. The relief that washed over her face was like watching the sun rise, and in that moment I felt like a hero. I felt like the foundation of the incredible future we were about to build. That feeling became my drug for the next 5 years. I immediately sold my car, a vintage Mustang I had painstakingly restored with my father. It hurt, but seeing the first tuition payment clear felt better. I took on a second job, working weekends as a dispatcher for a trucking company, the hum of the radio a constant companion in the lonely hours. Then came a third job, early morning stocking shelves at a grocery store before my main gig. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. We moved out of our already small apartment into a place that was little more than a box with a window, the kind of place you only live in when you're convinced it's temporary. I sold my grandfather's watch, my collection of first edition books, anything that had value. Our life shrank until it consisted of only two things, her education and my work. I became a machine built for earning. I managed every bill, every penny. I cooked, I cleaned, I did the laundry. I created a bubble around her where the only thing that existed was her coursework, her projects, her future. All she had to do was succeed, and for a while it was beautiful in its own grueling way. I would come home, my body aching from 16 hours of work, and see her passed out at her drafting table, surrounded by sketches and models, and my heart would swell with pride. I was doing it. I was making it happen. I would cover her with a blanket, clean up her mess, and get a few hours of sleep before my pre-dawn shift. I told myself the growing distance between us was just stress. Her program was unbelievably demanding, a pressure cooker designed to weed out the weak. So if she was too tired to talk, too stressed for intimacy, it was understandable. I was her support system, not another demand on her time. I was the silent, sturdy scaffolding around the magnificent structure she was building. Scaffolding isn't meant to be beautiful or noticed. It's just meant to hold everything up until the building can stand on its own. The first real crack in my carefully constructed reality appeared subtly. She started talking about her friends from university, names of people I'd never met. They were from wealthy families, their worlds so different from the one I was bleeding myself dry to maintain for her. When they would occasionally call, she would go into the other room to talk, her voice changing, becoming lighter, more sophisticated. She began to use words and phrases I didn't understand, talking about aesthetic theory and socioeconomic paradigms. I was proud of her intellectual growth, but I also felt a new kind of distance opening up, a gap I couldn't cross with hard work alone. Then came the talk about her mentor, a celebrated professor named Alastair. His name was on her lips constantly. Alastair said this, Alastair thought that. He was opening her eyes to the true nature of value and the cost of ambition. I pictured him as an old, wise academic and was glad she had someone to guide her. I encouraged her to spend more time with him to absorb everything she could. I was so naive. I was so focused on the financial cost of her dream that I never stopped to consider the other costs, the ones that were quietly accumulating in the shadows. The final year was the hardest. The last tuition payment was a monster, a single sum that was more than I made in a year from my main job. It was the final hurdle. I had exhausted all my savings, sold everything of value. The only option left was a high-interest personal loan. The bank manager looked at me with pity as I signed the papers, leveraging my future earnings for a debt that wasn't even in my name. But when I hit send on that final wire transfer, a wave of profound relief washed over me. We did it. I did it. It was over. All the sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the deferred dreams, it was all worth it. She was going to graduate at the top of her class. Our real life, the one I had been dreaming of for 5 long years, was about to begin. The day before her graduation, I sat alone in our tiny apartment, looking at the bank account, now an empty chasm. But I had never felt richer. I was depleted, exhausted, and deeply in debt, but I was filled with a boundless hope. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the scaffolding would come down, and I would finally get to live in the beautiful building I had helped create. I had no idea it was scheduled for demolition. The morning of her graduation felt like the first day of the rest of my life. I woke up before my alarm, the exhaustion of the past 5 years momentarily replaced by a giddy, nervous energy. This was it, the finish line. I had splurged on a gift, something I absolutely couldn't afford but felt was necessary. It was a professional-grade drafting table, custom-made from reclaimed oak, a solid, beautiful piece of furniture that symbolized the end of her studying on a wobbly kitchen table and the beginning of her professional career. It was a promise of the stability and success to come. When the delivery guys brought it up to our tiny apartment, it took up nearly half the room. I thought she would cry when she saw it. Instead, her reaction was restrained. She smiled, a quick, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "Oh, that's a lot of wood." She touched its surface briefly, then immediately got distracted by a text message on her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen as a genuine smile, the kind I hadn't seen directed at me in months, lit up her face. I tried to shrug it off as pre-ceremony jitters. Today was about her, after all. At the ceremony, I was a wreck of emotions. Seeing her walk across that stage in her cap and gown, her name called out with honors, it was a physical blow. I felt the tears welling up, a flood of pride so intense it was dizzying. Every 16-hour workday, every meal of instant noodles, every lonely night, it all coalesced into that one perfect moment. It was my victory as much as hers. I looked around, beaming, wanting to share the moment with her family. I spotted them in the crowd and waved, but they just offered weak, polite smiles in return, quickly turning away. It was strange. I had always been close with them, the hardworking son-in-law who was making their daughter's dream possible. But today, there was a chill in the air. After the ceremony, I tried to mingle with her friends, the ones I had only heard about. They were all impossibly chic and confident, talking about internships in Dubai and graduate programs in London. When I introduced myself, they would look at me with a polite confusion, their eyes scanning my off-the-rack suit, my worn-out shoes. They knew who I was, of course. I was the husband, the provider, the backstory. They would shake my hand, murmur a "so nice to finally meet you," and then seamlessly glide away, leaving me standing alone in their wake. It was during the reception that I saw her with him, with Alastair, the mentor. He wasn't the elderly academic I had pictured. He was handsome, silver-haired, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car did. He embraced her, a long, lingering hug that was far too intimate for a professor and his student. He whispered something in her ear that made her laugh, a genuine, unburdened laugh. I watched as he placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture of casual ownership, and guided her through the crowd. And for the first time, a cold, sharp spike of fear pierced through my pride. I had a reservation at a quiet, romantic restaurant to celebrate, a place we used to go for special occasions in our early days, but she vetoed it immediately. "Oh no, we can't go there," she said, wrinkling her nose. "Alistair is taking a few of us out to celebrate at Aperture. You'll love it." I didn't love it. Aperture was one of those aggressively minimalist places where the plates are huge and the food portions are tiny. It was cold, loud, and filled with people who looked like they were performing in a play about wealthy, important people. I sat at a long table surrounded by her new friends and her mentor, feeling like a ghost. The conversation flew over my head, critiques of postmodernism, anecdotes about their travels, inside jokes from their classes. They talked about her future, but they talked about it as if I wasn't there. Alistair announced he had secured her a prestigious fellowship in another city, a detail she had failed to mention to me. All I could do was sit there, nodding and smiling, a relic from a past she was rapidly leaving behind. The walk home was silent. The energy of the day had curdled into a tense, unspoken dread. I still tried to cling to my fantasy of our future. "So this fellowship," I began, trying to keep my voice light. "We'll have to figure out logistics for the move. I can start looking for jobs out there tomorrow." She didn't respond. We entered our apartment, the magnificent drafting table now looking absurdly large and out of place, a monument to a future that was already dead. She turned on the lights, but her face remained in the shadows. "Sit down," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. I sat at the wobbly kitchen table we were supposed to be leaving behind. She stood before me, a judge about to deliver a verdict. And then she placed a thick manila envelope on the table and slid it towards me. It landed with a soft, final thud. I opened it. My hands were trembling. Inside, I saw the cold, typed words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." It took my brain a moment to process what I was seeing. Divorce. It wasn't possible. We had just crossed the finish line. This was supposed to be our beginning. I stared at her, speechless, waiting for her to say it was a joke, a mistake. But her face was a mask of detached resolve. As I fumbled with the divorce papers, my mind a vortex of confusion and pain, she slid another document out of the envelope. This one was different. It was printed on heavy, expensive paper with the letterhead of a law firm I'd never heard of. It was an invoice, addressed to me. I read the items listed: emotional labor, inspirational support, career scaffolding, lifestyle curation. Each item had a price next to it, calculated with some bizarre formula involving billable hours and projected value. The grand total at the bottom was a staggering six-figure sum. I looked up at her, my vision blurring. "What is this?" I whispered. "It's a bill for my services," she said, her voice as cool and sterile as the restaurant we just left. "Alistair helped me understand. Our arrangement was transactional. You provided the capital, the financial investment. I, in turn, provided the emotional and intellectual labor that created the environment for your investment. You weren't just supporting me, you were investing in a high-yield asset. My education gave your life a purpose and a narrative for the last 5 years, a service for which compensation is due." She spoke the words as if she had rehearsed them 100 times. "You paid the tuition, yes, but I was the one doing the real work, the emotional heavy lifting. This," she tapped the invoice, "is simply balancing the ledger." In that moment, the woman I loved, the woman I had sacrificed everything for, vanished. In her place stood a stranger, a corporate strategist liquidating a failed asset. And the asset was me. The scaffolding was being billed for the privilege of holding up the building. The shock was so profound, it wasn't even painful yet. It was just a vast, echoing emptiness. The world I had built, the future I had bled for, had been a business transaction all along, and I had just been handed my severance package. The minutes after she explained the invoice were a blur of silent, suffocating disbelief. I remember staring at the paper, at the clinical, corporate jargon she had used to describe our life together. Lifestyle curation. Was that what she called the nights I'd held her while she cried from stress? inspirational support. Was that the term for the thousands of times I'd told her she was brilliant, that she could do it, that I believed in her? The hollowness in my chest was absolute. I tried to argue, my voice hoarse and cracking. I tried to remind her of the life we had, of the promises we made, of the love I thought was the foundation of it all. But it was like reasoning with a machine. For every memory I brought up, she had a prepackaged, therapeutic-sounding rebuttal. Our love wasn't a partnership. It was a codependent dynamic. My sacrifices weren't gifts. They were a manifestation of my own lack of ambition, a way for me to find purpose through her success. Alistair, her mentor, her new guide, had armed her with a complete psychological and philosophical framework to justify her betrayal, a new language that rendered all my old-fashioned notions of love and loyalty meaningless. She was speaking a dialect of pure, uncut selfishness, and I didn't have a translator. Her family, the people I had hosted for holidays and sent money to when they were in a tight spot, were no help. I called her mother, expecting a voice of sanity, of shock. Instead, I was met with a cold defensiveness. "Well," her mother said, her tone dripping with disappointment in me, "she has to look out for her own interests now. She's entering a different world and you can't expect to keep up. You should be proud you were able to help her get there." They saw me not as a son-in-law who had sacrificed his life for their daughter, but as a stepping stone that was no longer needed. The legal battle was a descent into hell. My meager savings, the little I hadn't poured into her tuition, evaporated within weeks, consumed by retainer fees for a lawyer who looked at me with a mixture of pity and bewilderment. He'd never seen anything like the emotional labor invoice. "It's garbage," he'd said. "It won't hold up in court." But he underestimated the sheer malice of their strategy. She had a shark on her side, a lawyer from a top-tier firm, undoubtedly paid for by Alistair. They didn't need the invoice to win, they just needed it to destroy me. They used it as a psychological weapon. They painted a picture of me in court filings as a manipulative, controlling husband. My hard work and multiple jobs were reframed as instability. My financial support was an unsolicited investment I had used to create a sense of obligation and trap her. My desire to build a future together was a plot to leash her potential to my own mundane existence. They twisted every sacrifice into a sin. The personal loan I had taken out for her final tuition payment became the centerpiece of their attack. They claimed I took it out in my name alone, specifically to hold it over her head, a permanent chain of debt to keep her compliant. The truth, that my credit was already too damaged from years of living on the edge for her to cosign, was an inconvenient detail that was easily ignored. The weight of it all crushed me. I received an eviction notice from our apartment. With the divorce proceedings freezing our non-existent joint assets and my own accounts drained by legal fees, I couldn't make rent. I packed my life into a few cardboard boxes and moved onto the couch of a friend from my logistics job. The humiliation was a physical ache. A few weeks later, I was laid off from that job. The stress had made me unreliable. I was missing shifts for court dates and lawyer meetings. I was distracted, a shadow of the diligent worker I had once been. So now I was jobless, homeless, and drowning in a debt I had taken on for a future that had been meticulously and cruelly dismantled. I fell into a deep, dark place. Most days, I couldn't even get off the couch. The world felt gray and muted. I would scroll mindlessly through my phone, and that's where I saw her. Her social media, which had once been filled with pictures of us in our simple life, was now a curated gallery of her new existence. There she was, clinking champagne glasses at a gallery opening, her arm linked with Alistair's. There she was on a research trip to Italy, posing in front of ancient architecture, a world away from the tiny apartment I was being sued over. She looked happy, radiant, and utterly unburdened. Each picture was a fresh stab of betrayal, a confirmation of how little I had meant, how easily I had been replaced. I was the husk she had shed to become this new, shiny person. One night, drowning in despair and cheap whiskey, I started digging through years of old digital files, bank statements, and emails on my laptop. My lawyer wanted any evidence of our shared life, any proof that our marriage was a partnership. not a business deal. It felt hopeless. But as I scrolled through endless PDF statements, my eyes bleary, I started to see a pattern. I saw the spreadsheets I had made, the budgets I had meticulously crafted. I saw the side-by-side comparisons of our incomes, mine, a steady, relentless influx from 3 different sources, hers, a column of zeros for 5 straight years. And then I saw the language on her invoice again. Services rendered, transactional arrangement, value proposition. They were using the language of business to destroy me. And in my drunken, desperate state, a thought sparked in the darkness. A wild, insane, and terrifying idea. What if they were right? What if it was a business? But they had misunderstood my role. I wasn't the client. I wasn't the investor. I was the entire damn company. I was the CEO, the CFO, the project manager, and the entire administrative staff of the Her Future project. And if this was a business dissolution, then it was time to conduct a final audit. A fire I thought had been extinguished long ago began to smolder. The part of me that had meticulously managed our finances, that had optimized every dollar, that had run the logistics of our lives with ruthless efficiency, began to wake up. I was done playing the victim. I was done mourning a love that was a lie. If she wanted a transaction, she was about to get one. I opened a fresh spreadsheet, the clean grid a stark contrast to the chaos of my life. And I began to work, not with a broken heart, but with the cold, calculating precision of a man who had nothing left to lose. The next morning I woke up on that lumpy couch with a strange and unfamiliar feeling, clarity. The fog of grief and despair had lifted, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The first thing I did was call my lawyer and fire him. He protested, of course, warning me that representing myself was legal suicide, that her lawyer would eat me alive. I thanked him for his concern and hung up. I couldn't afford him anyway, but more importantly, he was fighting the wrong war. He was trying to prove we had a loving marriage, while her side was arguing it was a business deal. I decided it was time to accept their premise and beat them at their own game. I signed the divorce papers. I didn't contest the dissolution of the marriage itself. That entity was already dead, and I had no interest in being tethered to its corpse. My fight was now about the settlement, about the debt, and about her ludicrous claim for emotional labor. I spent the next several weeks living in the public library. I became a creature of fluorescent lights and hushed whispers, devouring books on contract law, business litigation, and torts. I read about sole proprietorships, service agreements, and quantifying damages. I treated it like the most important job I'd ever had because it was. I was fighting for the last scraps of my life and my sanity. My first official act was to file a countersuit, but it wasn't a messy, emotional plea. It was a formal business dispute. I had legally registered a sole proprietorship, a consultancy firm specializing in long-term project management and financial scaffolding. I backdated its official start date to the month we were married. The name of the firm was simple, Project Nightingale, a nod to the long nights I'd worked. And then I drafted my own invoice. It was my masterpiece. It was a sprawling, meticulously detailed document that dwarfed her own pathetic attempt. I didn't just ask for the tuition money back. I billed her educational startup, her new legal entity as a professional architect, for services rendered over 5 years. I itemized everything. Financial planning and capital acquisition, which included the hours spent working my 3 jobs, calculated at a senior consultant's rate. 24/7 logistical support, which included every meal cooked, every load of laundry done, every grocery run, billed at a standard administrative services rate. Human resources and wellness management, covering every time I stayed up with her during a crisis of confidence, every time I took care of her when she was sick with stress, billed at a therapist's hourly rate. I included procurement services for every book and piece of equipment I purchased for her. I even added a high-risk investment premium for the personal loan that had single-handedly destroyed my credit score, tacking on a hefty percentage for the damage to my future financial health. I used their own cold, corporate language, turning their weapon back on them. Every line item was supported by evidence. My bank statements showing the deposits from 3 jobs, her tuition bills paid from my account, my work schedules proving the insane hours, even time-stamped photos and emails. The final amount on my invoice was nearly triple hers. It was an obscene, beautiful number. The day in court was surreal. Her lawyer, the expensive shark in the tailored suit, smirked when he saw me at the defendant's table, armed with nothing but a stack of binders. He opened by mocking my countersuit, calling it a fictional, desperate fantasy, a pathetic attempt by a scorned man to monetize a failed marriage. He was slick and condescending. Then it was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't talk about love or betrayal. I spoke calmly and methodically, as if I were presenting a quarterly report to a board of directors. I laid out my case. "Your Honor," I began, addressing the judge, an older woman with a famously no-nonsense reputation. "The petitioner has established the framework for this dissolution. She has defined our 5-year marriage not as a personal relationship, but as a transactional business arrangement. I have accepted her definition. For 5 years, my sole proprietorship provided comprehensive, exclusive support to her burgeoning enterprise. I was the primary investor, the project manager, and the entire back-office staff. The petitioner was the product, the startup. My firm enabled this startup to acquire its core asset, a world-class education. Now that the asset has matured, the petitioner seeks to dissolve the partnership and eject my firm without compensation, while simultaneously billing my firm for the privilege of the work it performed. This is not only a breach of our implied service agreement but a case of predatory business practices. I walked the judge through my binders, showing her the spreadsheets, the bank records, the loan agreement. I presented the numbers not as a story of sacrifice, but as a balance sheet. Her lawyer objected constantly, but the judge seemed intrigued. She was leaning forward, her eyes fixed on my presentation. I was speaking a language the court understood: money, contracts, and obligations. The climax came when I addressed her invoice for emotional labor. "The petitioner's claim for emotional labor is fascinating," I said, looking directly at my ex-wife for the first time. Her confident smirk was gone, replaced by a pale, anxious look. "If she wishes to bill for intangible support services, then she must also accept the bill for the tangible, quantifiable services she received. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot declare the relationship a business for your benefit but a marriage for your obligations." The judge's verdict was a thing of brutal beauty. She started by completely dismissing my ex-wife's claim for emotional labor, calling it an opportunistic and morally repugnant fiction that has no place in this court. The color drained from her lawyer's face. Then she turned to my countersuit. She acknowledged that she couldn't legally enforce my entire invoice as a standard business debt. However, she stated that I had provided overwhelming evidence of a grossly inequitable financial dynamic and significant, documented financial contribution resulting in professional enrichment for one party and financial detriment for the other. Citing her broad discretion in divorce settlements, she made her ruling. The personal loan I took out was to be transferred to my ex-wife's name, effective immediately. Furthermore, she was ordered to pay me a significant percentage of her income for the next 10 years as rehabilitative alimony and equitable restitution. The judge didn't call it a return on investment, but we all knew what it was. I had become a shareholder in the career I funded. The first check arrived a month later. Seeing her name, her new prestigious firm's name, on a payment made out to me was a strange, hollow victory. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the validation. It was about taking the soulless, transactional world she had tried to trap me in and using its own rules to find justice. I didn't feel happiness, but I felt a sense of peace. I had lost a wife. I had lost 5 years of my life. But in that courtroom, using her own cruel logic against her, I had found myself again. Thanks for being here on Reddit Whispers. I've shared my story, but now I want to hear yours. What's the most surprising decision that turned everything around for you? Your comment could be the lifeline someone else is looking for today.